Hello, I'm Armando F. Sanchez. Thank you for being here in our production. And we have a wonderful guest today, an author, wonderful author, great book, fantastic fiction. I'm in the middle of it. I'm still reading it. I've had to go back several times. And we have the author Victor Cass, who wrote Black Widow Bitches, Golden Foothills Press. And we're just thrilled about it because this is a story that comes from the idea that the world has to create an elite military group, and they're all women. So we're certainly going to get his perspective on what motivated him to write the book. What is it that we should look for in the story so that we increase our enjoyment, our knowledge, our involvement in the book that makes it more exciting. So Victor, thank you for being on our show today.
Armando, thank you for having me on your show. It's quite a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
We've been working on this for a while. So tell us, what motivated you to write this wonderful book?
Well, thank you. This book really started for me back in the mid-1990s. I was working on my master's degree in military studies, land warfare, over at AMU, and the classes I was taking, I was thinking a lot about our American soldiers in combat. The Gulf War I had just happened, a few years back, and they were just starting to talk about women serving in combat roles. They were talking about being on surface ships. I think some of the first females were going to be pilots. And I started thinking about what would it be like if someday in the future we allowed women to serve in frontline combat infantry units. And the writer in me thought, this would be an interesting story. And so back in the 90s, before this war that we're in now, before there was some major conflict, I started formulating the plot. Coming up with this idea of women infantry soldiers, airborne troops. And it kind of started building from there. It lay dormant for a while. And I think I've mentioned this in some interviews before. After 9/11, my interest in restarting the story came back out again because, as many people know, we've had women now on the front lines in places like Iraq and Afghanistan for many years now, doing multiple tours. And recently, we've had the first female infantry soldiers graduate from Ranger School. The United States Marine Corps had its first female infantry officer. And I myself, believe it or not, I know a young lady who's turning 18 who just signed up for the Marines for the infantry. She'll be shipping out soon in the summer. And it's happening now, and we're starting to get stories about these women in combat. So that's really the impetus for this book.
Now, give me a little bit of background on this. It's a new concept for the United States, but it's a very old concept for the Soviet Union, especially during the Cold War, during World War II. They were already in infantry. I mean, I'm not sure if they were separate from the males, but they were already on the battle zone, if I understand that correctly.
Absolutely. During the Second World War, the Soviet Union, obviously needing vast manpower reserves to help defeat the Nazis, had to utilize women in every kind of role, service troops, labor troops. There were women tankers. There were women night fighter pilots. So they made most of the. Go on, sorry.
Snipers. I was remembering right now a story
Absolutely,
about.
Yes. Yeah, so women they had to utilize them, of course, because they were just being drained of all manpower. And so the Soviet experience with women combat soldiers, naturally predates ours. Although we did have women serving in World War II, we had women pilots and stuff. Most of the time they served either stateside or as medical personnel, closer to the front lines in the different theaters, but not really in combat or combat support roles like we do today. And the Israelis, of course, have had a long experience for decades with women in their military forces. Again, mostly as trainers, trainers in armor, tank, infantry, artillery, and stuff. But a lot of countries have had these kind of ancillary or indirect experiences with women in combat. You know, irregular forces have used women at times during the Cold War and in some of the, you know, the hot wars in the Third World. But this book is unique because this is the first time that, like, it portrays a major Western power, in this case the United States, you know, fielding an entire airborne infantry division made up of women soldiers. Interestingly enough, much the way when the United States first, you know, before we integrated our military, our army, we had all African American units or all Nisei, Japanese American units in World War II. At times they had to have white officers come in to supplement and to help lead until enough, you know, African American officers, you know, filled the ranks, or until they had enough, you know, Nisei American officers. So in my book, I do kind of touch upon a similar concept where in the formation of this airborne division, as much as the female commanding general, the character Jennifer Reed, wants it to be all women, they have to have a certain number of airborne and infantry experienced males kind of fill some of the leadership positions at the platoon and company level, you know, just to help kind of bring them up to readiness and help train them. The main protagonist of this book happens to be one of these male infantry officers who, interestingly enough, they get from the stockade. He had been convicted of a crime.
To do this, huh?
Yeah, they got to get him anywhere where they can get him, and he volunteers to do it. And it's interesting to see how he interacts with and trains and fights in combat with his female counterparts. And there's a lot of, you know, leadership issues and you know, gender issues, and even he gets to see, you know, firsthand some of the sexism that still exists, some of the prejudice, and you know, it's an interesting story for anybody, males or females, to read this book and kind of get a view of what it would be like for our men and women serving out there in the front lines.
Now, you've taken, in some ways, in some circles, a very controversial issue of the idea of women being in the, you know, in the front lines, and yet you've taken on this whole idea that you've written about it. How much of this book is really, you know, do we find you talking about you and your own feelings and your own experiences? You know, this can't be just about them, you know, somewhere in there. Sure. As the author, find yourself involved.
That's a great question. I think that, you know, anybody who works in a field. I mean, I've been a police officer for almost a quarter century now. I'm a detective, and there are female cops. I've had females as my partners. And you know, when you work in a historically, traditionally male-dominated field like that, you're going to run across all kinds of positions. You know, there's no doubt in my mind there have been, you know, cops that I've interacted with who didn't think that women could carry their load. As I'm sure, you know, I was able to kind of tap into that feeling and express that in my book. You know, there are definitely male characters in the book who don't feel that women belong in combat for a whole host of reasons, some of which have been talked about in the media. You know, there's issues with, you know, women soldiers being able to carry a certain amount of load-bearing equipment. The strain on female soldiers' knees has reported to be a lot more prevalent and damaging to their physical health over many years in the Army. And they're both experts, in males and females, who, when I was doing research for this book, who I read and consulted, were either for or against women in combat. So it's still very controversial, even though we are just starting to get into this idea of, you know, women can be infantry, they can graduate from Ranger School, they can graduate from Airborne School, you know, they can be in the Special Forces. There's still so much pushback and resistance from so many sectors in these combat arms for the women. You know, I know that in Norway, starting in, you know, back in 2015, the Norwegians started experimenting with a mixed male-female military model, especially up in their border regions with Russia. These are where soldiers, they live together, they sleep together, they work together, they patrol together. Again, all these things are steps forward, but we're still, you know, I still get a feeling that all the militaries of the world are still in the kind of wait and see, you know, how's it going to turn out? You know, yeah, women have done their share in combat, you know, and in support roles as MPs, as civil affairs specialists. you know, and they've been wounded, they've gotten, you know, heroism awards. But I think for a lot of folks, you know, in Congress, the jury's kind of still out. You know, will these women be able to, you know, carry their share of the rigors of combat on a daily basis, you know, from far-flung places in the mountains of Afghanistan and East Africa, and all these other, some of these places, Syria and maybe even North Korea. Will it be worth the time and effort and money that we've spent into training and doing this? I think my book covers a lot of those issues, and you see them, and you see some of the issues that even people who were against women in combat have talked about, you know, pop up in the book. And, you know, it's realistic, and there's some valid concerns all the way around. But for the most part, I think that anybody who has studied our women coming back from the various theaters in this current war, they have made a good account of themselves all the way around. And I think that, you know, people who read this book maybe will walk away saying, you know what, maybe this is going to work.
Yep, I got the book here. Wonderful book. And I want to ask you where our viewers can go and purchase this book and begin reading it, and also learning a great deal about this very controversial issue and the way you sort of blend it into the storyline. Before I do that, one question. Women have been in the espionage world. I'm not talking about office work. I'm talking in the field. You know, we go back to World War II, World War I, where women were spies. They didn't have to carry all these big bundles, but they were out sabotaging like everyone else. And yet, do we recognize them for that work as well?
I don't think the public is fully aware, at least, you know, your average person in the street is fully aware of the contributions that women have had in various wars, in the various militaries, in the fields of espionage, you know, in the fields of military medicine even. You know, I don't think your average person would even know who Dr. Mary Walker was, who got the Medal of Honor during the Civil War, or even some of the individual females who disguised themselves as men in the Revolutionary War or the Civil War to go fight and to serve their country. You know, very few people could even mention any of the female spies from all of our wars, going back to even the Revolution, because there were female spies. You know, women are able to do things and infiltrate in ways and, you know, pass off as harmless civilians in unique ways that men aren't always able to, especially in combat zones. And that's why they're utilized so much as, you know, spies, insurgents, saboteurs, terrorists, and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, I think the knowledge is getting out there more and more. And I think you're going to start seeing more, you know, films and books written about these women who have amazing stories and done heroic, amazing deeds. Absolutely.
Where can our viewers find your book?
They can go on Amazon.com. They can go on any of the various online bookstores. I know I've seen it here at Vroman's in Pasadena, Vroman's bookstore. And they can go to the Golden Foothills website and order it directly from there too. And if they want to learn more about this book, there are various, I've had various interviews online that are posted. They can just Google the book or Google my name, Victor Cass, and read some of the interviews about this book. They go into some, you know, more detail about, you know, characters and plot devices and deleted scenes and whatnot.
Question. What happened to Victor when he started writing the book, and then when Victor said, I finished the book? You know, what transition did you go through in your views, in your perspective, given the 2 points?
That's also a really good question. I think in the process of writing this book, in the journey, I learned a lot about leadership and the interaction between males and females. You know, how hard it would be to, I mean, look, war is hell. Let's be honest, you know, and that's another thing, kind of a takeaway from this book. And I've had readers tell me this book is brutal. You know, it's just a brutal. Combat is awful. You know, combat's awful whether you're a male, a young 18, 19-year-old male. You know, and you know, one of the big takeaways is I'm a parent. myself, I have a teenage daughter who's just a couple of years away from being military age, and you know, this war is still going to be here, and her and all her peers will be military age. And I just kind of, you know, I think about the parents in my book, the parents of all the female soldiers who had to get notices that their loved one was never coming back, you know, and I think that really hits home. And I think about my own daughter, and you know, it really makes you think about war and military service, and where the world is kind of headed. You know, I think what we're seeing now, what we're hearing about in Europe and Sweden and elsewhere, in France and North Korea, and in the saber rattling in the Pacific Rim. A lot of my book predicts this, and it really makes you aware that, hey man, a lot of this stuff is there's still some potentially bad stuff coming down the pipe.
We're getting close to the end of the show. One more time, please. Tell us where we can find this outstanding book.
Thank you. You can get this book on any online source, Amazon.com, Golden Foothills website, and I know it's in some of the bookstores in Pasadena, Roman's bookstores. You can get it if you happen to be here visiting this lovely city. And I hope you all enjoy it. And if you read it, please post a review for me on Amazon.com.
That's something great, you know, that you're inviting people to respond to the book, not just something put it away. You know, talk to the author, be able to connect with them. Is there a website where the readers can go to you or find you specifically to put their comments or even ask questions as they're reading the book?
Absolutely. They can go to victorcast.com and be able to connect with me there.
Okay. Closing statements. There's so much to talk about. You know, war, women in war, the way you play out the dynamics of even a Latina as part of the circle. Each one is battling their own personal lives and then bringing it into the battlefield area. So I find that extremely intriguing. You know, give us your best presentation of what it is we should all walk away with when we read your wonderful book.
I think one of the things that many of our readers will be amazed by is, here is a book, you know, a big mainstream novel that for the first time has a host of diverse ethnic minority characters in major lead roles. You know, the main character in the book is a you know, Hispanic American. Some of his most trusted soldiers are a Chinese American, a couple of Latinas, you know, African American. I mean, it's just, you know, it's amazing that the diverse cast and the team and the combat veterans and the camaraderie, people are going to walk away really believing that these women could be in combat, and they're really going to be amazed and love the immersion that the reader's going to get into the whole kind of world of what it takes.
I think we may have lost connection here for a moment, but one of the comments that I was going to ask right now, Victor, was the idea of this story becoming part of a movie where it evolves, where different individuals, especially women, find themselves with exploring more of themselves and their position as part of the military. I think we lost contact with Victor, but nevertheless, we want to say thank you very much for being on the program. I'm Armando F. Sanchez. This is part of the Role Model series. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Armando F. Sanchez, or you can write to me at lsacnational@hotmail.com. Thank you for being on the show, Victor. We hope to have you in future programs. I know we lost your connection, but we will have you back and sort of react more and more about giving more of your insights that you share in your book. And I know that this is one of your other books. This is the third one, I believe. And I love the title. It's very unique. It's Capturing Black Widow Bitches by Victor Cass. Thank you for being on the program, and we look forward to having you in the near future. Adios.